doing? Not bad. Not bad. Do we have anybody in here yet?
No. See, under the time clock, it'll start to say who's here.
Okay. Perfect.
When I did this before, we got like 7. So I'll be curious to see if we get a ramp up this time.
Okay. So it should really be small and an intimate group here. So, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And Dunya, can you hear us? Can she hear us right now for asking when we want her to kick off the polls?
Yes, she can.
Okay, perfect. We'll see if we get anybody, Brittany.
I know, the stressor's on. Hi, good morning, Mark. It looks like we do have someone filing in. Where are you joining us from? Good morning, Kevin.
Morning, Kevin. Where are you calling in from? If everybody could drop that in the chat, be great to know. From Florida. Awesome. Austin, Texas. Northern Virginia. Likewise, I'm out of Northern Virginia myself. Germany, Charlotte, Dallas, Arizona. Folks from all over.
All these warm places. I got to move.
Absolutely. Also, okay, Wales. Very cool. Seattle, but currently in Pennsylvania. Michigan, California. Awesome. So we're going to kick off. Dunya, if you could kick off the poll here. The first question we just want to ask is if you're currently using gas today. You can click over there on the left and go to the polls tab. Is the poll launched there?
Yep, it looks like it's a good mix. About 50% of you, 60% of you not using gas. So we'll really try to use these polls to target the content throughout. But as Zach will lead kind of the chat and Q&A, if you have things you want to go slower on, dive in on, let us know in the chat. And of course, if you have Q&As, raise your hand.
Yes. Throughout this, we want to keep this as conversational as possible. We'll be able to stop, answer questions as you have them. So please come in with to the chat with those. And then we do have one more poll, I think, that we wanted to ask before we kick off. Dunya, if you're able to trigger that poll.
Not sure I see that poll coming live.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of the poll results here.
It looks like from the first poll, it looks like the majority of you aren't using gas or want to use gas. So we got like 80% in that category, with a few of you using gas and that remaining 20%. So we'll really target the content towards things you can use for free today, but include some new features if you haven't checked out from a gas perspective for you to dive into. And while Dunya gets the other poll, should we jump right in, Zach, with introductions?
Absolutely. Let's do that. So I'll start off. My name is Zach Knord. I am leading our GitHub Advanced Security sales team across North America. And I'll pass it over to you, Brittany.
Yep, perfect. Brittany O'Shea, and I lead our product marketing team for all of our security offerings. So super excited to jump in today and talk to you a little bit about the security suite, some of the things we have for free that you can use whether you're using GitHub Enterprise or not, as well as some of the items that you can upgrade to with GitHub Advanced Security. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and share my screen. We're going to go through a mix of slides and demos. So we'll get ready with that. Okay. While this loads, I'll just confirm you can see me in SlideShare mode.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I'll start with just like some background on GitHub. I know probably most of you are users, but when we think of GitHub, we tend to think about open source, and that's really important because the world runs on open source. So the security of our software and open source are deeply intertwined. But GitHub in recent years has started to do a lot more than be the home for open source, whether it be from AI programming to security tools like we'll dive in today, or CI automation. It's really meant to be the all-inclusive platform for anything you need related to building and shipping software. But why do we need that single integrated platform for developers, and why is it so important for security as well? Why has GitHub entered this security space? When we think about the security industry, it's about 20, 25 years old now that we started getting into moving away from manual penetration testing, where someone would come in and actually test your application, to automated testing, starting with dynamic analysis and static analysis. And in about the last 5 to 7 years, everybody's wanted to shift security left. And we know that's important. We've seen the data. I think the first one came out 12 years ago in an IBM report, that of course it's cheaper to find and fix things in development versus when you have a breach or when you have a production vulnerability. But it's really actually hard to do that. And that's because most tools were not designed for embedding into the developer lifecycle. So they've integrated, but they haven't really had the context of what optimized security looks like for developers. And so from a great example that I love to use is at GitHub, we of course have personal access tokens. When we look at personal access tokens that get leaked in public repositories, we have over 300 leaked a day. Now we help revoke those and scan for those immediately so it doesn't cause any downstream impacts or risks, but it's just really hard not to introduce security weaknesses or leak a secret or items like that because of, one, the lack of kind of nascent knowledge, two, the complexity of it, and three, just a lot of these things are really muscle memory. And that can really have dramatic impacts to the state of the software we depend on, as well as our own software. We see from a credentials breach perspective, I don't know if we trust the cost data. That always can be hard. It's based on a sampling, but the prevalence data, we feel really confident in that we just see attacks like this rising. And the top 3 attacks we'll continue to see is going to be on your software components you rely on and your secrets. So I'm excited to share today some of the features that you can be using to help protect from that. And I'll pause here because I know Zach works with a lot of customers. So I'll let him give some of his insights on just what he sees when he typically evaluates an account based on how many secrets they might have there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things that has been pretty surprising, being involved in literally over 100 proof of concepts at GitHub, is just how many secrets are in code. So when we go in, it's a one click. We can do a scan across your entire Git history, and our results are very accurate. So that's been pretty enlightening for customers to see, as well as just conversations around some of the implications of leaked secrets, where maybe somebody has read access. They're outside the organization. They've been given read access to those repos, and they're able to get those and end up with an incident. So I think that's probably the area that stood out to me the most, Brittany. I think in customer conversations is just around secret scanning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's rare that we see someone when we do a first scan that doesn't have a secret. I think you said maybe once in all the accounts you've seen. So it's just a hard problem that we can tackle together. And how we do this at GitHub is we're really focused on building security products that help developers. Our history is in really understanding and working with developers to build code. So we try to integrate and put security at all the relevant and rational points at where someone might take a task normally that would align with it, like code scanning at the pull request, which we'll see in the demo, or secret scanning, which actually prevents secrets from ever entering your code on each commit. And we really work across the community to make software security more collaborative. We felt this tension in the industry across open source needs to be more secure. Security teams need to understand development more. We believe that by just making things collaborative and by having an extensible platform, by open sourcing data, by allowing there to be free security tools on all open source, we can together raise the security posture. And that, what I'll dig into is just how exactly we've done that and give you some visualizations and some of the latest features you can use. And so if you think about our innovation focus over the past few years, we've really been focused on a few different things that we'll show today. One is increasing the security team's impact. How can we give you, if you're a security team or you're an engineering manager or you're responsible for tens or hundreds or thousands of repositories, more visibility, more places that you can integrate with your developers without having an intrusive interruption into their work. Deepening the capability of our analysis engines to detect more, to provide more coverage. Broadening our reach through our extensibility of our platform beyond just GitHub. So if you have a SIM tool of choice that you like to ingest data into, or you have a particular open source tool you love to use, you can plug that in that same great experience, and continuing to drive the community to collaborate. So the first thing I'm going to touch on that we've made a lot of advancements.
I was just going to say maybe some of a couple tools that I really see a lot of customers looking into using would be things like for like infrastructure as code or container scanning. Again, like tools like AppSec from Aqua Security, or they also have Anchor. Well, not Anchor, sorry, they have Trivy, but also Anchor. So some of the tools for different types of application security testing, where customers are still wanting that native GitHub experience for how those alerts and remediation process look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to show that later today. So that's a good call out. And if you have a favorite tool that you have a question on, please just drop that into the chat or raise your hand and we're happy to dig into that. But let's start with the advisory database. That's where it all kind of starts, especially from an open source perspective, is what's the data that we have to be able to alert you on vulnerabilities in the code you depend on. So our advisory database at GitHub is free and open source. It's licensed from a commercial commons license, so contribution or attribution only, but anyone can use it. We maintain it with a full-time curation team and security researchers who work to find, threats across the open source industry. They always publish that research and directly curate advisories, but we also have a great input for the industry or for maintainers who really play a pivotal part in disclosing security vulnerabilities. To disclose and issue CVEs through GitHub, we act as a CNA, so that means that we can actually create CVEs ourselves through MITRE, and we take in open source contributions to continue to improve that data. So how this looks in reality is because of the unique role we play, we issue a ton of CVEs for open source every year. I think we're crossing the 1,000 mark this year already. And we try to get that data directly into your hands through tools like Dependabot. So I'll jump in just a second and show it. But one of the ways we've improved this recently, and something that you can leverage, is we've really doubled down into how can we transform advisories through community. So we launched something called community contributions. And this really gives maintainers, security researchers, members from the community the ability to enrich advisory data for everyone to benefit on. Sometimes when we have an advisory come in, there might be some changes that happen down the line. There might be some more insights someone might have as far as exploits or items like that they could add to enrich this, but there's no formalized way for them to do so. This gives folks the ability to submit improvements. We've had, since we launched it a few months ago, over 800 contributions to date, and I'll show you some examples of those. But this is really powerful for both maintainers and the downstream impacts of your code. And a great example is one of the maintainers here, had issued a CVE thinking that it was one version of the branch was vulnerable, but they were able to get some insights from a security researcher that confirmed other branches were vulnerable as well. And they were able to add those patches and appreciated the help to make the advisory better. So I'm going to jump in right to a demo here. We'll switch the views so you can see how this might work in practice. So when we land on the advisory database, you'll see we support a number of ecosystems, and including we've just started also releasing on GitHub Actions. So if you're an Actions user, you use that to automate any of your workflows. You can leverage alerts like this. Most of them are contributed by folks that get credit here. So you can see these are either researchers who've disclosed this or worked with the maintainer, or someone who's made an improvement. But let's just jump right in so you can see the kind of data you can be leveraging. So you can see the package details that are affected. You can understand the impact and descriptions, workarounds, as well as like references that you can leverage to make the fix. You might be looking for a specific item. Maybe you have something you're alerted on, but for most users, they will get this in form of a Dependabot alert. So if we look at our security information, everything comes in your repo under the security tab. If I start with Dependabot, I'm just jumping into one of our demo repositories. You can see that you'll have alerts coming in when something is either found or when you pull in a package or ecosystem that has an issue. You can, of course, always filter down by the package itself and the severity, items in the manifest file, or looking by ecosystem and sort. And what Dependabot will do is beyond making this alert, and if you click into here, you'll see some of that same data I showed you earlier before coming from the advisory database that you can always go in and find more information, but it'll also create a pull request so that you can automatically update this with no additional effort. So if I just jump into this first one that Dependabot had create for me automatically, it's going to bump that from the vulnerable version into a safe version for you to use. It'll give you information around confidence, as well as any of the items you need to do to upgrade this. And this can be really powerful. This is free for everyone to use on their public and private repositories. So if you're not using this today from a software composition analysis perspective, highly recommend that you jump in. Something you can also get alerts on is that age, if you're using something that's out of date. And that can be really helpful too, to minimize that tech debt, minimize the risk of breaking tests from version to version. Any questions on the advisory database or Dependabot before we move back into some of the other features we've released? Okay.
Yeah, I don't see any questions.
Did you say there was a few questions, Zach?
No, I just said I don't see any questions out there yet.
Okay, perfect. Well, if any comes up, we can always dive in back. Hopefully you can see back into the presentation view, okay? Okay. So the next thing we've really been working on along the view of supply chain as well is SBOMs. We hear this a lot from a perspective of, the executive order that's come out and required SBOMs for many folks. And so there's been a big push to understand more what's coming from your supply chain. How do you get an inventory or analysis of this? One of the ways we help you with that here at GitHub is with the dependency graph. We've had this long before SBOMs were a thing, but one of the cool items that you can check out or use if you're not always already using today is we've recently created some APIs that allow you to upload information into the dependency graph so you can have a more comprehensive view, or you can export that information into one of the standardized XBOM formats that you'd like. Another item along that for security teams that might be trying to understand their risk or compliance is security overview. Previously, this was just a feature for GitHub Advanced Security users, but now any GitHub Enterprise users can jump in and see data and information from the security overview on both enablement and risk. So let's jump right over into Octodemo so you can see what that view looks like. When we talk to customers, there's usually typically two kind of areas that they're maybe struggling with, especially if they're responsible for hundreds or thousands of repositories. First is, where am I scanning? Have I enabled this across my repositories? Which are not enabled? Which actual features are not enabled across those repositories? And then secondly, where is my risk? So what teams are maybe having the most risk issues? Where are there areas that I could do training or lunch and learns to improve those items? Can I do a mass fix to start to clean some of these areas on? So anyone can jump in and see what tools they're using today. They can filter down by risk type, by team. So if you're managing certain teams or want to see how they're doing, you can dig in there. You can also filter by type of repositories and search for specific types of dependencies, whether it's a code scanning is not enabled, or there is a Dependabot alert or any item like that. You can sequence in and dig in to get a deeper insight into your risk or view.
Brittany, we have a couple questions here.
Yeah.
So the first one was, are grouped updates on the roadmap for Dependabot instead of one per PR change?
Yes, we're doing a lot for Dependabot alerts. You'll start to see some trickle in across the next month about grouping alerts to make that easier, minimizing or reducing the noise for alerts on inactive repositories, as well as more configurations that you can do from alerts. So we won't jump into the roadmap so much today, but I will link out to the public roadmap where you can read about those items and where they're coming.
Awesome. And then the other question was just in regards to just our SBOMs versus JFrog and X-Ray.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can you give me more context into that question? What is the specific asker looking to dig into?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Mark, if you want to jump back in and ask, provide any additional detail, we can come back to that. We had another question of what level of permissions/roles is required to access this overall dashboard?
Yep. So it does have an RBAC system. So for example, right now I'm an admin on this repository, so I can see every single repo across. But let's say I am just an admin on one repo. I will then only see my repo. Or let's say I'm a security or an engineering manager that looks after maybe 5 to 10 repos. I'll only see that view. So those are roles and permissions that you can scope out at the org level. And you can do this automatically as well with some of our integrations into identity and access management tools like Okta and items like that.
Absolutely. And then the other question was, is this also available for enterprise server? Or is this only for GitHub Advanced Security?
This is available for all GitHub Enterprise users. There's a little bit of difference. I'm demoing on GitHub Cloud, but we do have GitHub Connect and items like that you can use. So I can send the information afterwards for server as well and what that view would look like.
And Brittany, maybe it might be even worth talking about this being available for enterprise cloud for Dependabot usage to improve that too. I know that you don't need to you don't have to own GitHub Advanced Security to start leveraging some of this today. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you can use any of the free security features, which of course is mostly our supply chain features, but let's say you have public repositories and you have code scanning turned on as well in those public repositories, you can also leverage that for this. The only difference in your view, if you are not a GitHub Advanced Security user, is you won't see those code scanning results or those secret scanning results on your private repositories.
Right.
But
And that's also where you can integrate other third-party tools with code scanning. So if you wanted to have reporting on, maybe your infrastructure as code or container scanning tools that you would want to integrate natively, that would not be available, is what you're saying?
Nope, you can pull in those extensible items as well. So if you're using an open source tool on your public repository and you have results coming from that, you'd be able to see that. That could be like Trivy, for example, or some of those items that you mentioned. But on your private repositories is where you wouldn't see those coming in. You will need to be a GitHub Advanced Security user to see that.
That's great. And then also just stating for the enterprise, for enterprise cloud, you would only have access to Dependabot though, right? You wouldn't have access to code scanning or secret scanning or integrating third-party tools. But again, with Dependabot, with enterprise, you could start to leverage the Dependabot reporting here.
Yes, so if you are a GitHub Enterprise user and you're using Dependabot, you'll see that on both your public and private repositories coming through here for data. And then it's only on that code scanning and secret scanning where you get a different view between your public and private repositories.
Perfect. And then just to answer the last question, Mark would be happy to follow up with some additional resources to you. I'll drop in my email that you can reach out to get those. I think that answers all the questions that we had thus far, Brittany. Keep going and I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Perfect. Sounds good. Okay. So switching gears here, one of the things I talked about really briefly is preventing secret leaks. And if we go back to that chart of how many are just innocuously leaked, either by accident, by muscle memory, you're trying to authenticate. One of the things we released this year for GitHub Advanced Security users is preventing secret leaks on Git push. So wherever you're coding from or within your GitHub repository, when you go to make a push, if you accidentally go ahead and push in a secret, it will block that push. It will prompt you with a view to say, hey, did you notice on line 28, you introduced a secret to your code? Is this something you would like to remove? You could also log it as a false positive or something that is used in tests, but that will keep that audit trail always open for you in the closed alerts. So you can add notes and give context. So you always have that full visibility throughout. For this one, I won't jump into a live demo, but I've got a great video here that we'll go through and play where you can see this happening in action. And so you'll see that in this demo, someone's going ahead and they are getting ready to do their commit. They're going to accidentally leak a secret here. And then when they go in and push that commit through, you'll see that it's going to block them with push protection. And the great thing about push protection is it tries to do this in a non-disruptive way. We've had it turned on for in private beta and now public beta for just a few months, and we have about 50%, so over 600 organizations using this on all of their repos. It can be enabled in one click, which I will show you live, but you'll see how it says you've leaked this personal access token. It'll give you information on the line there, and that can be really helpful for developers to log that in. And so how do you enable this in your code today if you're a GitHub Advanced Security user, or how would that look for you? Is when you go over into your repository or at the organization level and you jump right into settings, you would be able to go down to this code security analysis. And one of the powerful things is most of the items outside of code scanning, which is a little bit more unique, can be disabled or enabled just in one click. Secret scanning also, you're allowed to do that. Push protection, I have this enabled on this repository. But if you wanted to enable or disable in one click, you could start preventing secrets from being leaked into your code.
And Brittany, I was
And
just
this
going
is
to try to share a little bit kind of what I see in the proof of concepts is a lot of times we'll go in and customers are surprised to find how many secrets actually exist in their repositories. And so once they go through that rotating exercise of making sure all these secrets are no longer alive, logically, the next question is how do we just prevent these from ever ending up into GitHub? And that's why they really are drawn to this ability to be able just with a click of a button, make sure that they're providing that feedback to the developers before they push them into the repository. So never even getting entered into the Git history has been something that they're very interested in.
Yep, absolutely. It really saves time from a remediation perspective, and it's really helpful that it's right within the developer workflow so they don't have to take additional steps or do workarounds or post commit history scrubbing or items like that to prevent their secrets from being leaked. Just in the last month, we have detected and been able to help developers remove more than 1,000 secrets that they were accidentally leaking into their code across those 500 accounts using this. So it's something that can be really powerful for organizations in just preventing any risk related to credential breaches. The last thing I want to dive into before we get into kind of extensible and language support is about enhancing the developer experience of security and making it easier to collaborate on security findings, pull in findings from different tools, and providing a consistent experience of security for your developer. This can be really important, and so much time is lost from context switching or needing to jump into other tools or solutions and getting out of that workflow. At GitHub, we run our testing primarily around the PR. So I'm going to jump right in here, and I will go back into the pull request and give you an example of how a code scanning result might look. So we use the PR as a central working place because when we look at all the developers, and there's been some big tests across the FANGs as well, which I can link out to articles too, is most of the centralization and one of the most consistent points throughout the build process is within the PR itself. This is where you're used to running your tests, you're used to having peer reviews and collaboration. And so after a lot of analysis and user testing, that's where we found it's best to optimize your security testing at. And to do this, what it might look like is here you can see that code scanning has a CodeQL high alert from a query built from users controlled sources. And so if you're a developer here like Nick, who I'm showing, you're able to show the paths to get more information about how this might be affecting your code. You're able to dismiss the alert with context as well as put notes. So if I wanted to say I won't fix this, I could add some areas of context and you could jump back and have an audit trail. You can ask your peers for help here like you might do in a peer review. Collaborate on why or why not this is an issue or not an issue. And you can always dive into more details where you can get information on why this is actually an issue itself, what's the recommendation for fixing, examples of fixes, as well as any resources out there on the web that you might want to use to learn more that our security lab has put together for the developer there.
Hey, Brittany. Sorry, just before we go too deep into code scanning, there was quite a few more questions that came into chat around secret scanning. One of them is more just what's the logic behind our identification of these secrets?
Yeah, so we work with over 80 providers. You can think of like Google, Amazon, HashiCorp, and we work on identifying and creating more consistent token keys so that can reduce false positives in detection. The engine then uses that consistency that we've established with these partners to detect secrets in your code. So we'll do a scan across all of your code when you initially turn this on and look for those detection patterns. We support more than 200 token types or detection patterns today. You can also, something you can do is create your own custom pattern. So if you go into settings here where I was just here, there's the ability for you can see custom patterns where you can define up to 100 custom patterns unique to your organization that's as simple as clicking a new pattern there and adding that. And this is really powerful for folks who have, something that might only be applicable into an area of their org or items like that. And you can turn that on just for the repo, or you can turn that on at an organization level.
Perfect. No, that answers that really well. And we do have a public repo to give examples of custom patterns, things to help you get started. A lot of times where I'm seeing customers use custom patterns is more around internal credentials that a customer might want to create and go look for. But in general, the patterns that we have are pretty substantial out there. Again, working with our partners, so our identification is very accurate because we know exactly how they're generating those tokens in order to go look for them. I think that was the main question. There was a couple different questions just right around that. And then also, what is the logic behind push protection for secrets? What does it identify? How does it identify secrets? Where I think we kind of talked about that because we know how they're creating their credentials. We're very for them. But anything that you want to talk about for the push protection logic there, Brittany?
Yeah, so for push protection, around launch, we were about 50% of all patterns and token patterns that we supported. We're continuing to increase that. I think most recently we're up to about 70%. But we look for those high confidence patterns. So we look for those highly identifiable token patterns that we have minted with our partners. And then we use that same loggage of scanning what you're going to commit and then preventing that from going into your production with that interception of saying, hey, before you push this, you have a secret online XYZ. And, here's some tips if you want to direct that to areas of helping someone fix that or understanding why they want to delete that. That can be customized at the organization level. And then you can also log and, have these alerts always trackable for you. So if I get into secret scanning alerts, if I had logged a push protection alert and I closed it as a test or a false positive, I don't have any closed secrets in this item, but I would click into here and you'd see that audit trail. And for code scanning or Dependabot, we might have some closed ones so you can start to see how that looks. We don't. This is insecure, but I'll jump in probably at the end and show you one that we have actually gone in and closed, not for demo purposes.
Perfect. And then the last question, Brittany, and then I think we can move back to code scanning is, does it only scan for GHE? So GitHub is what I believe that they're talking about for secret scanning.
Nope. So GitHub, as part of our commitment to the open source, that's something I talked about a little bit is, about 80% or 90% of all applications will be open source as we all know. So we are really committed to the posture of open source because we believe that our code's security posture and your code's security posture is deeply intertwined with open source. So what we do for secret scanning in all of the open source repositories is we scan that for free. We work behind the scenes with our partners to take action and revoke that. So for example, let's say you leak accidentally an AWS key in your public repositories. You'll very quickly, within seconds, get an email from AWS saying that that token has been revoked because it was leaked. And it will give you next steps that you can take on that token as far as rotating or any items that you may need to do there. So we do that for free on all public repositories. So any of your public repositories you have today are being covered. On private repositories where this may not be in production, it may not be public, that's where GitHub Advanced Security steps in. And that's where you have the ability to scan for secrets across all of your private repositories to see this audit list and log of what's been leaked at the repo level, as well as going back into that security overview view that I had earlier, where you can see all across the organizations under this little key area where you have potentially leaked secrets and filter and search on those, or dig deeper into any of your secret scanning alerts and items like that. You'll always have that closed audit trail that you can leverage, where if you dig in, you can always see, why was this closed? Someone could put an alert here. You can see this one was actually bypassed in push protections 2 days. You can always reopen these alerts as well and take action on them too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think those were the primary questions that I'm seeing. Keep the questions coming. This is great. We love the interactive aspect of this. So thanks, Brittany.
Yep. Perfect. And yes, I appreciate all the engagement. So thank you. So let's jump back into security at the pull request. And one of the cool things here as well is, let's say you want to go jump in and make a fix. This is all extensible into code spaces. So you could jump in, you could create your own code space, and you, through our Seraph extension, could view these results also from your code space and make that fix there too, which is really powerful. One of the things I kind of hinted at, and Zach has been talking about, is the extensibility of the platform. So you can see that it says code scanning / CodeQL. CodeQL is our proprietary engine. It's where we open source all our queries from. And we have companies like Microsoft and Uber and Facebook and Google all contributing to that as well to help make the strongest open source query base. But you don't necessarily have to use CodeQL. If you wanted to use a different engine, or if you wanted to use a few different engines, you're always able to do that. So let's say you are using Trivy. This would say code scanning / Trivy. The way you would set that up is through actions. So in order to do an action, you can always create a new workflow. You can see I have a few running. Actions is our CI/CD tool, all within GitHub. Here's where you could automate policy checks to break the build or anything like that. But if I click in to do a new workflow, it'll take me into the actions page. And here you could search for things like dependency review, which you can create policies or items like that. It'll search you into different security scanning tools you can integrate with out of the box if I want to go there. So there's over, I believe, 1,400 workflows today that you can choose from, both open source and commercial. The great thing is that the experience will always be the same. So your developers, no matter what tool you're using, no matter where you're working from, will always have this same view. And all our code scanning results are in the Seraph format, so you can export those as well into your SIM system, your reporting tool of choice, to make that customizable on your end. And we have a lot of great guides and items like that you can leverage to do that, or see how other folks have done that as well.
Perfect. A quick question there, Brittany, is how is this different from Checkmark Security Tool or SonarQube?
Yeah, so one of the things that I find, and I won't say that this is just like a Checkmarks or a sonar type, it's really across all tools, is they have built integrations, but they haven't really embedded security into the pull request. So what you'll notice here is, through every detail, you're never going out of the GitHub experience. You're always staying directly within GitHub. You're always seconds away from making the fix. With other tools, what will quickly happen is, while you might see the result in context, you'll quickly be driven back into that platform and asked to make the fix or get insights or guidance there. We find, from a productivity perspective, that can really slow folks down. Also, those tools weren't built and optimized for integrating into the PR. They were developed 15 to 20 years ago, when security was done by primarily security teams out of context. And so when you try to integrate them into the software development lifecycle, you can, face a lot of performance challenges, or you can face a lot of frustration from how they integrate into the developer workflow, because they weren't designed to be done that way. And that's where you really get into the intricacy between having an integration or being natively embedded into the developer workflow. And some of the things that GitHub has really been, nascent about developing is all about that experience. And while it sounds maybe nitpicky or small on the grand scale of things, let's say you're doing 100 commits a day, or you're building often, that's where you can get those frustrations from long scan times, or needing to leave, or a laundry list of issues that you can't fix or surface that information right here.
And, to kind of piggyback on that, I think one of the things that really stands out to me on just what we're doing, again, all those tools being good tools to use, right? At least we're using something. But the approach that GitHub is really taking that I think is excited about how we're moving the needle forward in application security is just taking a developer first approach. The developers are ultimately going to be the ones that fix them. So by putting this natively into the pull request, providing them the information on the call flow of how does that vulnerability move through your code, right there at that code review process, we're really focused on how do we actually remediate the issue. So moving from kind of this alerting, practice that we've seen in the security space for a long time to how can we actually drive down risk quickly in a way that allows us to do that at the speed that the developers are working.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other question here. Are any commercial DAS scanning tools working with your output to Seraph? All the plugins seem to be only SAST, and I would love to be able to upload DAS results to GAS for a single pane of glass. That is a phenomenal question. Brittany?
Yes, actually, we do have DAS, and you can, funnily enough, I know this is not common in the DAS world to view your results in a pull request, but we have integrations with DAS tools, both open source and commercial, like Invicti, Qualys, and items like that. And you can plug this in. So it would be your DAS tool of choice / code scanning. And you can find more information of that all in the actions tab. And we can link actually just a link to the actions repo. So you can go ahead and search and see that. I think there's actually a blog post as well that we can link out that shows you all of the DAS providers that we have actions with. So I can take that as an action item.
Yeah, and I know just to call out a couple other ones would be Stackhawk is another one that integrates. SUSE is basically an OWASP Zap, right? So if you're using OWASP Zap, you could do that, but it's a hosted and managed version of that. So a little bit more on the cheaper side to get started. So really, depending on what you're needing, there are integrations for tools like DAST as well.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've gotten most of the questions here answered thus far.
Perfect. And last but not least, as I touched on, always kind of trying to improve that analysis engine, the languages we support. We support most of the most popular, all of the most popular ecosystems, but we're constantly focused on expanding that support. One of the things that is in beta and swiftly moving towards GA right now is Ruby. We also have on the roadmap some mobile analysis is there with Kotlin and Swift, as well as partnerships to open source tools we can use. One of the cool things I always like to highlight is we do Purina this ourselves. So GitHub has one of the largest Ruby monoliths in the world. We scan our solution with our Ruby support. We've since turning it on, we are able to scan our entire monolith in about 20 minutes, which our functional testing or testing on that application takes about 25 to 30 minutes. So it comes in faster, which is great. It's not slowing down the dev process at all. The average scan time for that is just, like a minute, 30 seconds to 2 minutes for 95% of users. Of course, depends on the application and what it looks like. But in general, tends to come back faster than the testing. And just since turning this on ourselves, we've prevented dozens and fixed dozens of issues in our code base, helping us to be more secure. So that's a big impact. We're always looking at what's the latest ecosystem that developers want to use that we can support. And we have a great roadmap of those on the way. And last but not least, I know I didn't touch a ton on roadmap, but when we just look at the impact for tools, it really feels that it gives teams an advantage. It helps keep them lean. It helps make them more efficient. And that will continue to be our focus as GitHub, is providing you that stable, innovative partner that you can use across all of your development needs, really emphasizing on that developer experience so you can increase productivity, so you can empower your developers to actually fix the flaws or security issues you're finding, regardless of what tool you choose to use, that you can connect and tap into experts across the community, and that all of your security solutions are delivered natively. That covers off on some of the content that I wanted to have today about things that you could jump in and using, whether you're a GitHub Advanced Security customer or not. But I'd love to pass it back for any questions, any chats or conversations, and just thank you again for your time, your active engagement. We really appreciate this.
Awesome. Brittany, a couple questions coming in. Someone asked what the OWASP managed tool that I was calling it's SOOS, SOOS is, and I think it's only like $1,300 bucks for I think it's a year annual subscription. It's unlimited users and scans, so it's really just a set cost for an organization. So that's a pretty cost-effective way to get DAST, and then those scans also integrate. There's Stackhawk, which is a little bit more of a mature product from what I've seen, but a little bit more expensive too. But also, I think the person that is managing the OWASP project is also on the Stackhawk team. So a couple there that you could just go look at. Any other questions that I'm seeing out here, Brittany, that I'll read back to you? How do you recommend differentiating between playground proof of concept repos and those that need more security hardening, actual production apps? Great question. We want to set up a baseline of GitHub action workflows, code scanning, scorecards, policy checks, but all that overhead, including use of GitHub action minutes, isn't necessarily for every repo. So that's what, how do they approach that, and really looking at from a cost perspective to make sure that they're focusing on what matters.
Yeah. So I'd say it does uniquely vary as you're hinting at your goals and your teams. What can always be helpful is we do have a team that can set up time with you and walk you through this in the POV process or your trial process. So I'd always recommend that. But just my off the cuff with this information, I would say, you can always configure this minimally based on different repos. While we recommend automation, you don't have to use automation on every repo. So that's a choice that you could do from a budget perspective, especially in those areas where maybe you're less concerned and you just want that information at scale, but not necessarily automated. We also have configuration options you can check. So I showed you that kind of enable all view, but you could just enable at the repo level. Typically, when we sit down with an org that's maybe never done scanning or is migrating from a different scanning, we try to create that prioritization with them as far as which are the ones that matter to you most and roll out based on that. And then some areas, if you get into secret scanning or items like that, you don't have to use actions on that. That will just have always on scanning for you. So I think it's creating that, to your point that I think you're already making the question, just creating that tailored plan as far as what repos are important to you, and which ones do you want to put policy and have automated and things like that. And then working with your GitHub team, I know they would be happy to spend some time navigating this with you on where you can leverage automation and where you could actually also save on automation to reduce your budget and spend there.
Absolutely. And, looking at the repos that are most committed to, there's some different things that we go through. And a proof of concept, just to kind of walk you through it, how quick and easy it is to get started with GitHub Advanced Security as well, is just with a couple clicks. So again, we can go scan your entire Git history with one click, and then we can do the same with Dependabot, giving you that org level visibility. If you already have enterprise today, GHEC, you can go and get visibility for all your Dependabot alerts. So going and enabling that, I would recommend kind of as an action item. If you already have GitHub Enterprise, enable Dependabot, begin to start getting visibility. And where Brittany was showing security overview, where you can dive in and start to filter based off of risk, might be a great way for you to start if you already have Enterprise. Another question that came out in the chat, Brittany, was, is GAS available for non-enterprise customers?
Right now, GAS is an add-on to the enterprise SKU. But if you are interested in learning more, you could always do a trial of enterprise and GAS together.
Yes, great. So currently you do need enterprise. We'd be glad to kind of walk you through that, though. If you want to reach out, I think I dropped my email a few times in chat, could connect you with the right folks, but be glad to support your questions around that. Another one that came up here, Brittany, is any plans for GitHub to release a SIM or not?
Not right now, but we do have a ton of SIM partners that we work with, and I'm just going to actually drop in the blog so you can see that. But that includes all of the popular SIMs like Splunk or Microsoft SIM as well. So I'm just pulling up this blog here, depending on what you're using, but there's
Yeah, I
I
think we have integrations with Datadog. We have it with Sumo Logic now, Sentinel. So there's a lot out there that you can integrate with. However, I will say so it's not going to be a SIM, but security overview and what we're building there. Brittany, maybe if you could talk about how that is allowing you to bring other application security testing tools to be native within GitHub to be able to respond to some of these alerts to drive down risk.
Yep, absolutely. So one of our big focuses is always that we can take in your data and we can export your data to whatever tooling of choice is important for you. And so if you're using a SIM tool to correlate your risk or items like that, I linked in the chat to a blog that just gives a high-level overview of some of the integrations we have there and some of the workflows and patterns you can use. But for security overview as well, is if you're using any of those plugins like your we mentioned throughout, or Zach mentioned, you can always see those under your code scanning alerts, and you can dig in and you can correlate that information. You can filter down by team, as I showed. You can filter down by alert type, finding, anything like that. And we're continuing to invest in that. So you'll see on the roadmap, there's a lot of planned enhancements coming in the next few months as we also strengthen that solution for our customers.
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to just drop one of my favorite comments, Brittany, that from HashiCorp, a customer of ours that talks about this. Let me drop this in the chat. This is just a quote from the story that HashiCorp gave. I'm going to drop this link in there as well. But if you run detection and remediation outside of GitHub, you have that added complexity of trying to figure out who committed the code, when was it committed. And by doing that all within GitHub is really a lot of the value that I'm seeing around security overview. I'm not sure what's going to be announced later or what's public roadmap, so I won't say too much, but there's a lot of investment going into things around like MTTR and all that types of reporting and giving you graphs and visualizations around the vulnerabilities and alerts that you have to make sure that you're driving down risk appropriate. So you can use a SIM, but we're also doing some really great things to help you triage and manage risk natively and drive down that risk within GitHub.
Yeah. And I'm just dropping in the chat while Zach's giving those insights or some of the content that I said I would link out to earlier. So I just dropped in some tips from prioritizing Dependabot alerts, which I think was one of the first questions. Here is the blog on security overview, who has access to it with the expanded implementation of it, as well as tips for getting started, how you can use it, what you can see, links off to assets there. And then I think there was just one more question around code scanning in action. So I will pull that and drop that into the chat as well.
Yeah, just to piggyback there too, Brittany, on security overview and kind of a lot of the questions that come up in customer conversations. So to start, it was just the security manager role and org admins that would get visibility into that organization, right? Because you didn't want everybody to see all your secrets across your organizations if they didn't have access to those repos. Now what we've done is we've given access to those who have whatever repo you have access to, you'd be able to get visibility because you'd be able to see that at the repo level. So if you have 5 repos that you're a code owner of, you'd be able to go in and see that there. But otherwise, you would need to have a security manager role that would give you visibility as an org level, right? And that's really how we see security overview as being that page to really give the security teams, a seat now at the table within that developer experience as kind of that first-class citizen of how can we pull you along the journey to become more efficient as we develop code.
Yep, absolutely. And the last thing I'll just link out is around that more comprehensive SBOM or dependency graph. But I know we're coming up on time, so I just wanted to really thank everyone for attending. I know Zach and I have really enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, please let us know. Zach, maybe we'll drop your email again right at the end so you can capture that, and we'll be happy to follow up or answer any things you have. But thank you for carving an hour out of your busy days.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Pleasure meeting everyone. Thanks, John. That was fun, Brittany. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was good. It was great working with you.
Absolutely. Likewise. Looking forward to seeing you at Universe next week.
Yes.